In the Invincible comics, there were tons of heroes and villains who died by the end, and today we're ranking the worst deaths in the series. These rankings will be based on physical pain experienced by the victim, as well as the shock value of the death and any mental suffering. Okay, so starting off in last place, we have Ceecil Steadmen, who was the guy in charge of the GDA. In terms of shock value, Cecil's death was one of the most surprising, because it seemed like he was prepared for 99.9% of situations. For me personally, I expected Cecil to either survive till the end or die in a Viltrumite invasion, but what actually happened to him was more tragic. In issue 111, Cecil was murdered by Robot, and to understand why this is so messed up, we should quickly examine their relationship. Back in season 1, Cecil selected Robot above all other heroes to lead the new Guardians of the Globe. Rudy himself even promised not to let Cecil down, and following that they worked together to stop various disasters and invasions. While it's true they disagreed on certain things, there was always a mutual respect to the point that Cecil trusted him more than any hero. An example is how later in the comics he gave Robot control over every superhero team on Earth, which is a job you would only give to someone you trust completely. However, what Cecil didn't know is that Rudy had drastically changed as a person after living in another dimension for hundreds of years. To be specific, he and Monster Girl spent 700 years in the Flaxan dimension, where time moves a lot faster compared to the main timeline. As a result, when they returned to Earth, it had only been around 10 months since they left, and Cecil thought they were fine. On the inside though, Robot's time as a prisoner and an emperor had changed him to where he now planned to rule the Earth similar to how he ruled the Flaxans. Issue 111 is when Mark finally exposed his evil plan, and Rudy's response was just to kill everyone. Sadly for Cecil, he happened to be the first victim as Robot sliced his throat, and then while Cecil was dying, his skull also got crushed. In terms of pain, this death was awful but also pretty quick, so he didn't suffer for as long as the others in this video. What can't be ignored though is the emotional suffering, because we can only imagine how betrayed he must have felt. Before his death, Cecil had given Robot top secret information that actually helped him to take over the world, so his final few seconds must have been filled with just deep regret. Now, ranked in 9th place is Conquest, who at the time of his introduction was the strongest Viltrumite we'd ever seen. If we're being honest though, Conquest should have died after getting tag teamed by Mark and Eve, however he was secretly kept alive by Cecil. That decision was made so that Earth could learn more info about the Viltrumites, but Conquest broke out as soon as he woke up. For that reason, his actual death didn't come until months later when he faced off against Invincible for round 2. By that point, Mark's strength was almost on the same level as Omni-Man, but Conquest still had better stats and obviously better experience. Why is it then that he lost to Mark for a second time? Well, it comes down to two things, and that's Mark's willpower and Conquest messing up. As we know, there isn't a single Viltrumite who's able to breathe in space, but what they can do is hold their breath for days or even weeks. That's why in issue 72, Oliver had to fly to a nearby planet to get some air, with Conquest following behind him. By following Oliver, Conquest made one fatal mistake, which is that he stopped paying attention to who was behind him. His lack of awareness gave Mark an opening to just slam the older Viltrumite to the ground. This attack pushed all of the air out of Conquest's lungs, and since he was getting strangled, he couldn't take a new breath. To fix this, Conquest first tried to remove Invincible's hands, and when that didn't work, he then flew them up into space and slammed back into the planet's surface. His hope was that all of this would force Mark to let go, but Invincible vowed to hold on until the kill was complete. In response, Conquest desperately fought to get one more breath and kept punching till his hand went through Mark's stomach and out the other side. Despite that, Invincible never let go even when his guts were falling out, and eventually Conquest died from a lack of oxygen. Not only was this a long drawn out death, but to put it simply, it's embarrassing. Imagine being this legendary fighter who survived the purge on Viltrum, who survived the deadliest disease they've ever had, and who's been conquering planets for thousands of years. After surviving all of that and more, there just shouldn't be a scenario where he's losing twice to a guy who's had powers for 2 minutes. What makes it even worse is that Conquest started smiling when Mark strangled him, cause I guess he just thought it would be so easy to break out. To then end up dying from this exact same thing, yeah, he must have gone through every possible emotion. Now, moving on to the 8th worst death in the series, this one belongs to Oliver Grayson. Oliver was the first hybrid between a Viltrumite and a Flaxan, and he grew up quickly thanks to the Flaxan side of his DNA. As an adult, he got a job with the Coalition of Planets, and their mission at the time was to protect the universe from Thrag. By this stage, Thrag had conquered a bunch of planets using his own army of Flaxan Viltrumite hybrids. Given that Oliver was also a hybrid, he chose to help the Coalition by joining Thrag's army as a spy. The idea was that by him getting close to Thrag, the Coalition could eventually learn where Thrag is and what he's planning to do next. For a while, this plan seemed to be going okay, but it majorly backfired when Thrag decided to test Oliver's loyalty. The test was that Oliver had to stay home and do nothing, while Thrag went out to kill Mark, Eve, and Terra. Naturally, Oliver couldn't let that happen, and so the situation forced him to blow his cover. In the very brief battle that followed, Thrag killed him by punching a hole through his chest. This punch was so devastating that in the comic, you can see Oliver's guts flying out the back. Besides being incredibly painful, there are two reasons why this death was insane. Right before Oliver died, he and Thrag were tussling, but there was no indication that the very next panel would be an instant kill. Reason number two why this death was crazy is that in the past, other Viltrumites have survived similar injuries, so even with him being half bug, it seemed possible, if not likely, that he'd survive, which I guess made it all the more shocking when he didn't. Also, a bonus reason why this death was insane is that he died so quickly that Eve couldn't heal him, even though she healed Mark, who'd been ripped in half. Anyhow, up next is Angstrom Levy, who had one of the most gruesome endings in the entire comic. In issue 104, Angstrom was kidnapped by Mohawk Mark, who's one of the many evil variants of Invincible. As a reminder, Mohawk's aim was to expand his Viltrum empire into other dimensions, and in season 3, Angstrom agreed to help him. The problem is that things didn't work out the way they wanted, with Angstrom stranding Mohawk and some of the other variants in this wasteland dimension. What followed this was months of starvation, fighting, and cannibalism, with Mohawk being the only survivor by the end. When he finally escaped, Mohawk took Angstrom to his own dimension, where he tortured the villain for several days. Because of certain guidelines, I probably shouldn't show the full image, but if you want to see it for yourself, then check out issue 108. For this video, all we have to say is that Angstrom was clearly beaten, branded, had metal stabbed through his flesh and bone, and had a bunch of tubes hooked into his body. Physically, there aren't many experiences that are more painful than this, but Angstrom's suffering finally ended when Robot chopped off his head. Now, while we're on the subject of people killed by Robot, the next person on this list is another one of his victims. As we know, Rudy went on a killing spree after his plans got exposed, and he targeted anyone who might be a threat. Cecil was the first to go since he had the resources to fight back, while heroes like the Immortal, Black Samson, and Brit were all targeted because they had enough influence to lead an uprising. These are the types of people who you'd expect Robot to go after, but personally I never expected Shapesmith to be murdered in cold blood. Shapesmith was the friendly goofy Martian who'd been a member of the Guardians for a few years. His Martian DNA gave him the power to morph into anyone, but on his own he just wasn't smart enough to pose a threat to Rudy. My guess as to why Robot went after him is that because he's such a big fan of the Immortal in the comics, Robot probably wanted to avoid them teaming up. Regardless of the exact reason, Rudy killed Shapesmith by crushing his main organ, and right before his death, the alien was crying his eyes out. Unlike Cecil, Shapesmith had no idea why this was happening, so his final moments were filled with nothing but confusion and despair. Following Shapesmith, Omni-Man's death is the one ranked in 5th place. What's tragic about Nolan is that he almost survived till the end of the series, but in the final battle with Thrag, he got ripped apart. To be specific, Thrag impaled him just like he did to Oliver, only this time he then tore through the rest of Nolan's upper body. The end result was that Omni-Man got sliced into 2 pieces, with only a tiny bit of flesh connecting his top half to his lower half. In fact, we see his intestines just floating through space, but luckily Nolan was able to protect his heart from getting fully destroyed. Viltrumite hearts are the secret to their regeneration, which is why, for example, Oliver died straight away because his heart was damaged, and it's why Nolan survived at least for a few hours. Sadly, Thrag did do some damage to his heart as well as the rest of his body, and so Nolan did die later that same day. Still though, there was time for him to have a heart-to-heart with his son, where he convinced Mark to become the next Emperor of Viltrum. Switching over to 4th place, we have a death that was shocking in every sense of the word. In season 3, we were introduced to Scott Duvall, also known as Powerplex, whose sister was killed when Omni-Man destroyed Chicago. After the event, he was convinced that Omni-Man and Invincible were working together, and he vowed to personally get revenge. Luckily for Scott, he was born with the power to absorb and release energy, a power that he enhanced with this stolen tech. What's interesting about this character is there are noticeable differences between his story in the show and his story in the comic. One example is how Powerplex defeated Robot, Monster Girl, Bulletproof, and Rex at the same time, but in the show, this fight was replaced by him losing to Eve. Another example is how his son, Jack, is a baby in the show, whereas in the comic, Jack is walking, talking, and fully aware of his surroundings. For me personally, I just feel like him being aware makes his death even more tragic, cause what must he have been thinking when his dad killed him? If you've seen the show, then you know how Jack dies. Essentially, Powerplex and his wife wanted to trap Invincible by pretending that she was a hostage so that the hero would show up to save her. The real problem was that they brought Jack to be a hostage as well, who obviously didn't have a say in this. If it was just Scott's wife being a hostage, then fair enough. If you want to put your life on the line, that's one thing. But to bring Jack along on this dangerous mission, it was some of the worst parenting we've ever seen in the show. When Scott then tried to vaporize Mark, the electric current traveled through the floor and burnt Jack to death in the process. His death was one of the very few times we saw this happen to a child, with Scott's niece being another example. Now, just before we move on to the top 3, I want to give honorable mentions to Rex, Thetis, Black Samson, and Battle Beast. All of their deaths were ones I wanted to include, but there were reasons why they didn't make it. For instance, Battle Beast was happy to die the way that he did, and so the lack of mental suffering brought down his overall score. Similarly, Rex's sacrifice is something he wanted to do in the context, as well as it being his most heroic moment. So I didn't want to say that he was suffering mentally because, similar to Battle Beast, this is something he wanted to do. When it comes to Thetis and Black Samson, their deaths were in the same bracket as Cecil, it's just that Cecil's had a bit more shock value since we knew him way better. In any case, it's finally time to explain the 3 most brutal endings in Invincible. The bronze medal belongs to Mohawk Mark, who was one of the many people killed by Robot. In issue 108, Robot turned on this device, which produced a noise that was harmful to Viltrumites. The sound works by targeting their inner ear, causing regular Mark and Mohawk Mark to start screaming in pain. While his mouth was open, Robot then launched a high-tech grenade, which he hoped would dig deeper into the Viltrumite's throat. Luckily for Robot, Viltrumites are weaker on the inside than they are on the outside, and so when the grenade exploded, it actually killed him. The image of Mohawk's death is one of the most, if not the most horrifying end to any character, as we see his blood and guts shooting out his mouth while his eyeballs pop out his skull. What's crazy though is that due to him being so tough, the outside of his body stayed perfectly intact while his insides got shredded by the bomb. That's what makes his death so unique, because for a short time he was fully conscious and the outside of his body was fully intact while his insides were just getting ripped apart. An ending like that has to be so excruciating that even though it was a quick death, I still have to give it maximum points when it comes to pain. Now, ranked ahead of Mohawk Mark is Thrag, whose death was somehow even worse. For those who don't know, Thrag died after being dragged into the sun, having his throat ripped out, and then crumbling into a million pieces. The way it happened is that shortly after he defeated Nolan, Thrag got attacked by Robot and Mark. During this fight, he seemingly took no extra damage, and so eventually Mark tried something different. By using his momentum to push Thrag towards the sun, the 2 Viltrumites plunged into the surface. According to Google, the sun's outer layer is over 5,000 degrees, enough to instantly vaporize any living thing. Even for Viltrumites, their bodies aren't built for this kind of heat, with Thrag's skin melting off in issue 140. By that point, Mark was willing to do anything to keep Thrag trapped on the sun, and so he stayed to fight as they both melted together. The sizzling pain they experienced goes way beyond anything we've seen so far, especially considering how long it lasted for. In Mark's case, he at least had one moment where he was protected thanks to a robot suit. However, for Thrag, he was just burning non-stop. That detail is important because usually Thrag is indestructible or pretty close to it, whereas in this state, Mark was able to fatally bite his throat. The pain of having his throat torn out, combined with the pain of being burnt to a crisp, is why Thrag's death breaks the scale for physical suffering. You might be wondering then, why is he ranked in 2nd place instead of 1st? Well, it's because the worst death in Invincible is one that breaks the scale in different ways. Coming in at the number 1 spot are the original Guardians of the Globe, who were all betrayed by Omni-Man. In the comics, Nolan described how the Guardians welcomed him when he arrived on Earth, as they taught him the basics of being a hero. Over the next 20 years, he then frequently worked alongside them, and considered some of them to be friends outside of work. However, his loyalty to Viltrum meant that one day, he knew he'd have to kill them to weaken Earth's defenses. That day finally came shortly after Mark got his powers, and Nolan tricked all of the Guardians into gathering in one location. At the time, the team consisted of Martian-Man, Red Rush, War Woman, Darkwing, Green Ghost, Aquarius, and the Immortal. This lineup was pretty much a one-for-one parody of the Justice League, with each Guardian having similar or identical powers to their DC counterparts. Anyway, once they were all gathered, Nolan savagely killed them, but the way it happens was way more interesting in the show. Unlike the comics where he finishes them off super easily and super quickly, in the show all of the characters go through a whole range of emotions. At first, the Guardians are all shocked when Omni-Man tries to kill the Immortal, and that shock turns to horror when he then crushes Red Rush's skull. Darkwing and Green Ghost were his next victims, and this was actually an amazing piece of strategy. From experience, Omni-Man knew that Green Ghost has the power to become intangible, meaning his physical attacks wouldn't work. With this in mind, he decided to take advantage of her human nature by killing Darkwing and then throwing his dead body towards Green Ghost. As a human, there's no way she would have just let his body pass through her, like most humans aren't that callous, and so she instinctively turned off her powers in order to catch him. During that brief moment of compassion, Nolan punched through her brain, killing Green Ghost instantly. At this point, the other Guardians were confused and they started to theorize that Omni-Man might be being controlled because, they just couldn't imagine that he'd willingly do something like this. One by one, he then bashed Aquarius' head, snapped War Woman's neck, and crushed Martian Man's main organ. Technically speaking, he killed the Immortal too. Actually, he did it more than once, but since he keeps coming back, it doesn't really count. Overall, the Guardians' deaths were off the charts when it comes to shock value and the mental suffering that they went through, not to mention they each had a pretty painful ending as well. For that reason, they comfortably take the #1 spot, especially considering their deaths are the reason that many people first heard about the show. If you can think of any other deaths in the show or the comic that deserved a place in this video, then let me know in the comments down below, but they have to be characters that have a name. That is my one requirement, they just need to be a named character because, the background characters get killed in the most gruesome ways. If I was including them, they would have probably ranked quite high in this video. Also, I got to apologize because it's been like 3+ weeks since I uploaded a video, but it's because I had a cough and I still kind of do have a cough at the moment, but today we're just powering through, trying to get this video out, so I'd appreciate if you left a like and also subscribed. Thanks for watching as always, and until the next one, peace out.